All right, good afternoon. My name is Turner Bitton. I'm the executive director here at Westview Media. We're joined today by Lara Briefer, the director of the Department of Public Utilities at Salt Lake City. Welcome, Lara.
Thank you.
We're very glad to have you. Just for those in the audience, really quickly, this conversation is the first in a new series that we're doing called City Talk, where we'll be bringing different folks from Salt Lake City, department leaders, division directors, and folks that are making the work happen here at Salt Lake City. We just want to have a casual conversation with folks and give you all, as the audience, an opportunity to meet the folks who are making the work possible here in Salt Lake City. So to get started, Lara, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you came to be the director of the Department of Public Utilities?
Well, thanks, Turner. And it really is great to be here. I was excited when I received this invitation to do this event. I think it's a great idea to, help me get to know the community, and especially on the west side here. A little bit about my background. I've been working for Salt Lake City for 13 years, all in the Public Utilities Department, actually almost 14 years now. I have an educational background in environmental science, a bachelor's degree in environmental studies, and quite a bit of time spent as an environmental consultant before coming into government. And I actually spent a few years as the assistant town administrator for the town of Alta before coming to Salt Lake City. I also have a master's in public administration from the University of Utah, and a keen interest in public policy and natural resources. I feel that this position, if you would have asked me 25 years ago when I started my career that this is what I would be doing, I probably would have been a little surprised, but I've always been very passionate about natural resources and environmental policy and public service. I come from a family with a long history of public service. I have many relatives who've worked for the Los Angeles City Fire Department, and medical professionals and teachers in my family. And so the ethic of public service is strong in my family and with me as well. So I think that's primarily how I got into this position as well. The opportunity was really great.
Well, thank you. And just a quick follow-up question, transitioning from a small town like Alta to a large city like Salt Lake City must have been quite a transition. What have you learned, and kind of what's the biggest difference in those two different cities?
You would think that there were a lot of differences, but municipal service and public service, there are a lot of constants. And, one of the first is really serving our community. And the town of Alta had its own complexities in terms of public policy and budgeting and that type of thing. But it is interesting to come from, I think it might be the second smallest city in Utah to the largest city in Utah. And, I think the scale is bigger, but the underlying ethic of public service is very similar. And I would have to say that I had some amazing mentors when I worked at the town of Alta, former Mayor Bill Levitt and Mayor Tom Pollard. I worked for both of those mayors as well as some of the staff there. And boy, they were just fantastic mentors. And I learned a lot about our watersheds working there too, since the town of Alta is at the headwaters of the Little Cottonwood watershed. And I would say that's probably one of the pathways in which I found myself here at Public Utilities, because the Department of Public Utilities for Salt Lake City and the town of Alta have had a very strong partnership over time. And we still do.
That's great to hear. Well, why don't we focus a little bit on what your day-to-day job looks like? So can you explain what the Department of Public Utilities does and kind of how it impacts the lives of residents of Salt Lake City?
Yeah, sure. So the Department of Public Utilities is responsible for providing drinking water to Salt Lake City, as well as some communities outside of Salt Lake City, such as Mill Creek and Cottonwood Heights and Holiday. We also provide sanitary sewer service to residents of Salt Lake City, street lighting services, and stormwater, storm drain services, and flood control. And so, you know, three of the different utilities we have are all water related. And then we have the street lighting utility, which has a strong public safety element in it as well. On a day-to-day basis, you know, we have a team of about 430 employees here who do everything from maintaining pipelines and treatment plants to, and street lights to engineering and designing plans for rehabilitation or new infrastructure. We've got a very busy staff, and really, you know, our day-to-day work is making sure that we are providing these critical services to all of the citizens of Salt Lake City and elsewhere in our service area. We do work a lot with our communities on that as well.
Thank you. I imagine that there are a lot of different public inputs that come into your work, folks worrying about power lines or, excuse me, light poles being out and that type of thing. And I would suspect that most people interact with your department in that monthly bill that comes to them. Right. Can you kind of just talk about the process for how your department plans the work that you do and how you kind of manage all the different moving pieces?
Yeah, and I would say our department planning is a very significant part of the work that we do. And our planning horizon can sometimes be very long-term. So for instance, we just finished a 40-year water supply and demand plan that brings us out to 2060. And basically, you know, we evaluate the water resources we have and the infrastructure we have. And then we develop assumptions based on what our population is going to look like out that far. And we make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that we have water resources by 2060, getting to the right places in the right quantities. We also have a very substantial capital asset program where we're constantly out looking at our critical infrastructure. You know, most of our infrastructure is out of sight and out of mind and under public ways, under streets, a lot of pipeline conveyances and collection systems and treatment plants. And we have a very systematic approach to looking at the condition of our infrastructure and then planning on the repair and rehabilitation of aging infrastructure. And along with that is some very long-term and strategic financial planning. My organization doesn't collect taxes. All of most of the revenue for us is through our rate structures. And you mentioned the monthly bill. So when you pay your monthly water, sewer, stormwater, and street lighting bill, that goes to each of those particular funds to really take care of our assets. So yeah, planning is a very large component of what we do.
Thank you. The next question is, how does the Department of Public Utilities kind of fit within the broader Salt Lake City government? How do you interact with other departments? And I imagine there's a lot of overlap and collaboration.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of collaboration. We can look at this a couple of different ways. One is that we have an ordinance structure that we work under and that we have certain requirements that we need to meet. And many of the city departments have sort of their own part of that ordinance structure. And then we also work together on long-term planning and on financial planning and budgeting. We work together with our public interactions and public engagement. An example of this would be the road bond, actually, that the city is working on to repair some of our aging road infrastructure. We are collaborating with the city's engineering and transportation divisions to make sure that we are replacing aging water and sewer and stormwater infrastructure underneath those roads before they're rehabilitated. So There's a lot of planning and coordination that occurs. Public safety is another place where we work closely together with our other city departments as well.
Thank you. We just got our first audience question, and it relates to what we just talked about. Before I ask Mark's question, I just want to remind the audience that if you're watching live and you have a question, please submit it in the chat and we'll be sure to get to as many as we can today. But I'm going to kick it off really quickly with Mark's question. He asked kind of how the division of work between Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City works. There's often overlap and it can be a little bit of confusion there.
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and I can answer that from the perspective of my department, because we do work quite closely with other Salt Lake County divisions and departments and functions. So an example of that would be, for instance, the Salt Lake County Health Department and the Public Utilities Department work very closely on things like source water protection. We have mirroring ordinances on groundwater source protection and on watershed protection. In fact, in our watersheds, the Salt Lake County Health Department and Salt Lake City Public Utilities have what's called joint authority, where we make decisions together on different types of activities that occur in our watersheds in the mountain areas. Flood control is another place where there's a lot of coordination between the Public Utilities Department and Salt Lake County. We work very closely with Salt Lake County Flood Control, particularly during the spring runoff events or during rain events, on infrastructure maintenance and on planning for those events, releasing water, opening up the surplus canal, those types of things. And so there is overlap and quite a lot of coordination between county and municipal divisions and departments.
Thank you. I'm just going to speak really quickly to Kathy. Kathy left a comment, and I'm going to hold it until we get a little bit further down in questions. Okay. But the next question that I have prepared for you is, what are some of the biggest projects and priorities that your department is working on right now?
Yes, so we have quite a few priorities. I mentioned earlier aging infrastructure. We're being really proactive in terms of assessing condition and creating a plan for every piece of the infrastructure that we have. I think it's important for us to look to examples in other parts of the nation where we've seen impacts of natural disasters and other, I'm thinking of Texas and Mississippi most recently. You know, we want to make sure that our infrastructure is resilient and can bounce back from those types of disasters. So working with aging infrastructure and on resiliency, including climate resiliency, are really big priorities for us. Watershed protection continues to be such a big priority for us. And we're working very proactively with other entities such as the U.S. Forest Service, Salt Lake County, and even UDOT on some of the work they're doing in transportation. When I talk about watersheds, I'm talking about our headwater watersheds where our drinking water comes from in Little Cottonwood, Big Cottonwood, Parley's Canyon, and City Creek. But then our idea of watershed protection has also expanded to the Jordan River watershed and really thinking about ways in which we can manage our water resources to resolve some issues. For instance, on the Jordan River or some of our tributary streams, particularly water quality issues. So we're also prioritizing that as a proactive approach.
Thank you. Kind of a follow-up to that question, since our organization is focused on the west side of Salt Lake City, what are some specific projects, and you mentioned the Jordan River, which is something that defines our neighborhood, but what are some priorities or projects that you're working on specific to the west side?
Well, I'll point out one that some of you may have been watching as the construction progresses. But we have a Jordan River watershed project over on 1000 North and Cornell Street. That is a pilot project to accomplish what I was just referring to before in terms of trying to see how we can best treat urban runoff, so that what goes into the Jordan River is cleaner. And so that project we're kind of excited about because it takes what was an existing pump station and it slows down the flow of the water and filters it through some wetland areas and other land areas before it goes to the Jordan River to try to reduce the amounts of pollutants that might be carried through urban runoff. In addition to that, we are designing an environmental education piece of that project too, so that there will be some opportunities for schools or anyone just to go to learn more about water cycle and how they can help maintain water quality and water resources. So that's when we've also have a number of underground infrastructure upgrades, rehabilitation, sewer, stormwater, and drinking water pipelines primarily in that area. We've got a very large project, the largest project in public utilities history, actually, in the rebuild of the wastewater treatment facility that is located near Rose Park area. And that of course serves the entire city, but it is located in the west side of the city. And that project we have to do because the treatment plant has reached the end of its useful life, but also we have some additional Clean Water Act regulatory requirements we need to meet on the discharge, the treated discharge from that facility. So that one should be done by 2025, but again, just a very large infrastructure project for us.
Thank you. I'm going to circle back just a little bit. You briefly mentioned resiliency and the planning efforts that you've got underway for dealing with climate change. Just wondering if you could share how climate change is impacting our water system and kind of how you are planning around the issue.
Yeah, I like to think, with respect to climate change, really the impacts of climate change are going to be felt most in the water system, in the hydrologic cycle. And in our evaluations, there are a number of places where we are planning for, because we think this is where the impacts will be. One, of course, is in water supplies, and the shrinking snowpacks, the changes in runoff patterns, drought intensification, all of those have the potential to impact the availability of our water resources. And so with that, we've been doing a lot of planning around increased conservation. We just finished an updated water conservation plan that has much, I think, more aggressive water conservation goals over the next several years. We're looking at infrastructure resiliency, and also we are really just looking at the science behind how we can better project water resources on a year-to-year basis. So we've actually contracted with the University of Utah and are working on a number of interesting projects with them with respect to climate change and snowpack and the retention of water in our groundwater basins. With respect to stormwater, we're revising our stormwater master plan to take into consideration increased storm intensity. So I don't know if you might remember in 2017, we had a rather large storm during the summer that overwhelmed our system, primarily in the Sugar House area, but some along the Jordan River too, with some flooding. And we're looking at ways in which our stormwater system can better adapt to storm intensification. And some of that is with natural infrastructure, with green infrastructure and floodplain management. And some of it is with the hard infrastructure itself. And then watershed protection, both in the mountains and downstream, because another impact of climate change could be increasing water quality issues. And we have been seeing that with harmful algal blooms. It seems to be more frequent on some of our water bodies, and that can have an impact on the availability of water for drinking water purposes. And so we're really studying that and the causes behind it and the ways in which we would be able to treat that water.
Thank you. I've asked a bunch of questions of you in really quick succession, so I'm going to give you a break for just a second and remind folks that are watching live that if you have questions, you can submit them in the chat. My next question is, you've mentioned water conservation a couple of different times, and I appreciate the work that you're doing on water conservation. What can our readers and what can viewers do as individuals to support water conservation in our city?
Well, we have a lot of resources available to our community, and a lot of found on our website, actually. So we've got landscaping resources. We offer water checks so people can check their irrigation systems, and a number of other strategies. And I'd be happy to give you the link for that that we can use. But you know, I think as a community, just having that ethic toward every drop of water, you know, every drop counts, and the way we use it really counts. And whether it's indoor water use or how we use water outdoors, you know, really taking a step back to make sure we're not wasting water, and employing strategies where we could get some really great gains from water conservation. But we're here to help. So if anyone has questions about that, we have a lot of great resources, as does the state of Utah with their Slow the Flow program.
Thank you. And I'll be sure to post that link
okay, great.
to your website. Mark has another question, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. But does your department have a role in the commitment that the mayor made to 100% renewable energy?
Yes, we do have a role in that. First of all, we would be purchasing that renewable energy to power our systems. And you know, it does take a lot of energy to treat and convey water and wastewater, and we realize that. So, you know, we will be part of that purchase of renewable energy. But I'll also say that my department completed a couple of years ago a renewable energy plan to specifically look at ways in which we might be able to use some of our water infrastructure to generate some of our own renewable energy. So we have a few projects that are kind of in the out years a little bit, but potentially hydrologic projects, like at our Mountain Dell Dam, for instance. We've also completed a wire to water energy efficiency plan, and we're incorporating that right now to make sure that every time we touch a piece of our infrastructure that has an energy footprint, that we're using best practices to make it as efficient as possible. So that could be our treatment plants, or that could be a pump station in our system.
Thank you.
We're very committed to that.
You can imagine. My next question is kind of a segue along those lines, and I'm paraphrasing another question. But how has your department, or how can folks encourage your department to implement dark sky goals?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that, because I forgot to mention on an earlier question about important priorities for our department. We have just completed an updated street lighting master plan. So our department's responsible for the lights in the public way. And as part of that master plan, we contracted with an expert from UCLA, Travis Longcore, who actually wrote a section of our plan with respect to not just dark skies, but also lighting that promotes public health and wildlife health, particularly avian species and other species of animals. So one of the pillars of our new street lighting master plan is that responsibility pillar, to look at ways in which we can implement more dark skies and more ecologically friendly lighting. And it also identifies areas in our city where, for instance, ecological lighting is most beneficial. That would be areas near Great Salt Lake. northwest quadrant, areas along our waterways, Jordan River and some of our other waterways, and then areas like that back up onto the East Bench area. So we have a lot of great ideas that we're excited to implement with respect to public way lighting in that regard. We also hope that the guidelines that we've developed for our public way lighting can be translated to development and private lighting and development. So part of the plan is more user-friendly for developers to come in and take a look at what the best management practices would be.
Thank you. I'm gonna, sorry, there's a little bit of feedback. I'm gonna jump back a little bit. Mike asked a follow-up question, or Michael asked a follow-up question. He asked where the project that you mentioned on the Jordan River was. I believe you said 1000 North and
Cornell Street.
Cornell Street. And
yeah.
Can you just explain what that project is again real quick?
Yeah, so that project is, it's a pilot project where we're looking at, so currently at that location, or before the project started, we had a stormwater lift station where stormwater would be collected, or urban runoff would be collected and stored there and then discharged into the Jordan River. This project actually takes that runoff and filters it through some natural infrastructure prior to it being discharged to the Jordan River. So it slows that water down, allows filtration to happen, and hopefully the discharge to that will be a much better discharge in terms of water quality and turbidity into the Jordan River. And the reason I say it's a pilot is because we want to see how that works, and then we'd like to implement that elsewhere where we have discharges along the Jordan River, or some kind of similar project like that to slow down that urban runoff and allow what enters the Jordan River to be much cleaner.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of go back to my core questions really quickly, and then we'll go back to audience questions. But can you just kind of describe your approach or philosophy to kind of how you view your job and your kind of day-to-day work?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And, you know, I think one part of my approach is collaboration. The work that we do affects so many different people. We have a lot of stakeholders and affects our community. And so collaboration with our community, public engagement, recognizing the stakeholders who are part of any process that we are conducting, I think is a really important approach, getting feedback on our approach. I think that also helps inform really sound public policy and decision-making, because we have a lot more knowledge about the consequences of whatever project that we undertake or whatever initiative we undertake. And then I think another thing that really informs my approach and philosophy, and I think it's true across my department, there's a really strong legacy in this department, and this department's over 170 years old, but a very strong legacy and commitment to public service and to the protection of public health and the environment. And that is a really strong core philosophy of mine, and it's what I came here to do. And so the combination of, you know, collaboration, sound policy and decision making, and public engagement and feedback, and a real commitment to the public and the environment really informs the approach that I take, and a lot of my employees take as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that you mentioned collaboration, and one of the questions I'd like to ask you as a follow-up to that is, what is the best way for residents and citizens to kind of engage in the process and to provide feedback to you?
Yeah, and we're always working on that because and you know, this last year with COVID has caused us to make a lot of changes in that too, because I think honestly one of the challenges is bandwidth and not just ours, but bandwidth in the community in terms of, you know, hey, we have this project, we'd like your feedback on it. You know, and really trying to reach people to understand this is the impact this has on your life or the services we provide. We'd like to know your thoughts. And so what we found is, you know, just trying to engage people in multiple ways, whether it's a format like this. I know we send flyers and postcards to folks to try to get feedback. We try to keep our website up and running as much as possible as well, and updated so that people can take their own initiative to look on our website. But it's always kind of a challenge to know that we're reaching all of the people that we want to reach. And so we also have a very open door policy. I do get a lot of feedback from our constituents on various issues, and one of my philosophies is responsiveness, and I try to get back to people very, very quickly when they reach out to me or to our staff. But it really is a partnership with our community, and I really do look at it that way, and we are trying really hard to make sure that partnership goes all directions.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to give you another break because I know I asked a bunch of questions in a row. And I'd just like to give a plug for all of the different social media profiles of the Department of Public Utilities. They're active on Instagram and Facebook, and I've found them to be very responsive and a great place to engage with your department as well. So I would encourage folks who are watching to follow all of the various city departments on social media and to engage there as a way of staying connected. As a next question, I'm wondering what role your department has in the development of the Northwest Quadrant, particularly the inland port area.
Yeah. Well, so our role primarily is infrastructure. That area of the city, you know, until the prison went in, didn't really have very much water or sewer or stormwater infrastructure. And so our role is to make sure that adequate infrastructure is in place there. When development occurs in an area, the development pays for that infrastructure up front, but they have to follow our standards to meet all of the public health and safety requirements that we require, but also are required of us by EPA and Department of Environmental Quality at the state. And so our role is to really make sure that what goes in there meets all of those high standards. We also have a role in terms of, I think good planning on the stormwater side. That's a unique area in terms of its grade. It's very flat, and there's a high groundwater table. So, you know, the way we manage stormwater and runoff in that area is going to be different than other parts of the city. And also there's a huge environmental responsibility that we in the community have in that area. It's a sensitive ecosystem. It is incredibly valuable ecologically. And so from the water standpoint, we're really taking a deep look at that. From a lighting standpoint, we're also starting to work with developers in the area to, in fact, we met with some last week to talk about dark skies and ecological lighting and that type of the things that I described that are in our updated master plan. So I think we have a pretty large role in terms of how that area gets developed and the appropriateness of the development.
Thank you. You've mentioned groundwater several times, and I'm just wondering, it's of particular interest in the Northwest Quadrant, but how does your department work with the Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District?
We haven't had a lot of interaction with them. We are in the middle of reviewing their environmental assessment right now for the work that they are proposing to do, I think this coming year. So right now we're taking a look at that in terms of of water quality and ecological appropriateness as well.
Thank you. And if you say your department had a disagreement with a different department or a different perspective, how are those handled and resolved?
Usually just in a very collaborative manner. We sit down and talk about the different obligations that our different departments might work through. I've found that all of our departments and divisions in the city that we've worked with, there's a lot of openness and a lot of commitment to collaboration. So problems get resolved.
Thank you. I'm going to ask my final question that I pre-prepared for you, but can you share, a story of success or something that inspired you, or that I guess that inspired you? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I find inspiration every day in this job, and it comes in a lot of different ways. But I'll say that I'll go back to sort of the history of our organization and the amount of planning and the amount of stewardship that has been involved as this organization helped to secure the water resources necessary for our community and really steward our natural environment. That goes back to Brigham Young. and I find that history very inspiring. And I think it also serves us in our inspiration today. But, our employees, my coworkers here inspire me every day. I mean, they work so hard in not the greatest conditions sometimes, to fix a broken water main in the middle of winter when it's 10 degrees outside. And, there are some really great stories that come out of here every day. I'm also inspired by problem solving. And when we're talking about water in the West, I think that we've got a lot of complexity to tackle in terms of how we make sure that we're stewarding our water resources and managing them in a way to make sure that underpinning of our economy and our public health is good for now and in the future, but also so that we're continuing to protect our natural environment and the waterways that we treasure here as well. And I think, we're going to keep working on some of those really hard and complex problems and find solutions to them. And that's inspiring to me too.
Thank you. I'm going to give you another quick break and just remind the audience, I'm at the end of my pre-prepared questions. I have a couple of them from the audience. If you have been watching along and you have questions for Laura, please feel free to submit them in the chat. We still have some time left for audience questions. With that, you've mentioned quite a few plans and reports that your department has put out. If someone wanted to say, read maybe the top 3 reports to understand the work of your department, which ones would you recommend that they look at?
Well, let's see. I think it would be helpful to look at our water conservation master plan, or water conservation plan, our most updated one, our watershed management plan, and our water supply and demand plans. I think those would be great. And then of course our updated street lighting master plan. That's 4, not 3, but those would be really, really helpful reports or plans to look at.
Thank you. And I'll make sure that I post links to all 4 of those after we're finished. The next question came in from Kathy earlier, and she talked about the purchase of Allen Park, and that was done with, what did she say? With stormwater funds. Can you explain how they were used and kind of how that's possible?
Yeah, so most of that purchase wasn't done with stormwater funds, but we did contribute some money to that purchase. And that's because of the incredible value of having that floodplain in Immigration Creek stay undeveloped, relatively undeveloped. There are water quality values to that, as well as floodplain values. So we thought that would be a really great opportunity, especially in the long term, if there are some riparian corridor improvements that we could make to improve the riparian system and water quality. We'd love to do that in the long term. We do have some riparian corridor plans as well that were developed alongside a riparian corridor ordinance. And those plans look at the different reaches of the streams in our city to identify good areas for restoration, vegetation restoration and stream bank restoration. And this area in Allen Park would be a good place to implement some of that in the long term too. Thank you. For those that are watching that maybe don't know what a riparian corridor is, can you explain that? Yes, it's the area between the high water mark of the stream and the top of the stream. So it's that area where you've got a lot of great vegetation. Oftentimes it serves as a good flood control area, but it also serves as a good habitat, aquatic habitat area. Very important in our streams. Thank you. My last question came in from Peter, and he asked, when the city is building out infrastructure, is the city building it themselves, or do you go through a bid and contract process? We typically go through a bid and contract process. Okay. That is the end of the audience questions that I have. Is there a question that I should have asked you today that I didn't ask you today? One question that I often get that you didn't ask today, and I don't know if it's of interest, but I get the question about how COVID and the events of 2020 affected the work of our department. And I'll just say that, first of all, I have so much respect and I'm so grateful for all of the employees of my department and the leaders of our city in terms of that response. But 2020 presented some amazing challenges and we were able to have strong continuity of operations through all of them, whether it was the pandemic or the earthquake we had last March, almost exactly a year ago last March, or inland hurricane windstorms. But I think that one of the things that I saw with my department is just how resilient our employees were and how they were still able to get all the work done that needed to be done to continue the service. Thank you. That's a great question. I hadn't even thought of that. So thank you for that. Just as kind of a final question before we sign off today, what if there was a takeaway, or if you could kind of bundle up everything we've talked about, what takeaway would you hope that people have about the Department of Public Utilities? I think one takeaway would be that we are so committed to serving the public and making sure that we are stewards of the resources that we manage on a day-to-day basis for now and for future generations. And also that we are really open to engaging with the community and I personally want to hear from folks and get their thoughts and concerns and feedback is really important to us as well. And I think those are the two main takeaways, that we are stewards of our public resources and we want to hear from you. Thank you. I really appreciated our time together today. I want to just let the audience know that we have, as I mentioned at the beginning, that this is a series of conversations that we'll be having. Everyone from the police chief to the fire chief will be coming on, and we'd invite you to follow along, follow the series. And if you're watching this as a recording and you have questions, please send them to us and we can be sure to follow up afterwards. So thank you so much for your time today, Laura, and you have a good day. Thank you, Turner. Take care.